For Politics PA, I'm Steve Ulrich. This is Voices of Reason. Today, the first in our Keystone Candidate series, as we talk with Republican Scott Perry, who represents the 10th Congressional District in Cumberland, Dauphin, and York counties in central Pennsylvania. We also have a fascinating conversation with a pair of longtime Republican political strategists, Dennis Powell and Craig Snyder, as they lay out their cases for why they support their preferred candidate, but they don't agree on which candidate. That coming up today and much more on Voices of Reason.
Welcome to Voices of Reason. My name is Terry Tracy, and I am pleased to introduce the Keystone Candidate Forum brought to you by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. The Keystone Candidate Forum is a special joint venture series designed to highlight those candidates from both sides of the aisle, running the most competitive races in the most competitive state in the nation. As we enter the final weeks of the election, Voices of Reason and the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry strive to provide you, voter, with the opportunity to cut through the partisan rhetoric and overwrought campaign advertisements and hear directly from those who seek to serve our Commonwealth in high office, how they intend to address those issues that you care about the most. To kick off the series, we are honored to have Congressman Scott Perry join us. Congressman Perry is the incumbent Republican congressman representing Central Pennsylvania's 10th Congressional District. He was first elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2012, where he has championed free speech issues, a robust energy economy, and strategic infrastructure investment. He also served in the military for nearly 4 decades, flying 44 overseas combat missions, and retired as a brigadier general in the Army National Guard in 2019. Congressman Perry is also an entrepreneur, small business owner, and father of 2 daughters. Congressman Perry faces former local news anchor and Democrat Janelle Stenson in the general election. And while most political analysts have the district rated as lean Republican, Democrats have targeted the seat as a potential pickup opportunity to eat into the Republicans' razor-thin majority in the U.S. House of Representatives this year. Congressman Perry, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Again, thank you so much for providing the opportunity, providing the forum for people to get to know me, ask questions, hear my viewpoints. And, I make votes on behalf of the people that I represent, but I think it's important that they know how I've come to my conclusion, what my rationale is for my vote. And so I appreciate this opportunity to let them know.
We're very happy to have you. And also joining us today is my co-host, John Anzer. John served as the Vice President of Public Affairs for the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, and he is based in Harrisburg. Gentlemen, with that, let's get started. Congressman, we'd like to begin by giving you a few minutes to introduce yourself to our listeners and describe what you believe is most at stake in this election, not just for our Commonwealth and for your constituents, but also for the nation this fall. Upon the conclusion of your remarks, I'll turn it over to John for the first question. And from there, we will just have a lot of fun, I guess. So, Congressman, with that, the floor is yours.
Well, awesome. Just to let some folks know about me things you might not know about me. I grew up right here in the heart of the 10th Congressional District. I live in a little town named Dillsburg. This is where I grew up. It's where I went to high school. I started out here. My mom was a single mom, lived in this, I hate to call it, but it was a party house for a local college. So there was no electricity, no running water, no insulation. As you know, it gets cold in the wintertime. And as a child, that's kind of was part of my upbringing, which is a little hard scrabble, but it teaches you learn to appreciate things. And I watched my mom struggle during my early life with employment, making enough money to keep her family fed and clothed. We went shopping once a year. I got 2 pair of pants that were to last all year, and that was right before the school year began. And, look, we had each other, and that's what we knew growing up. And so that was kind of normal for me. I started out in Harrisburg on Berry Hill Street, but then moved to that little farmhouse. And there's a whole story behind that. But, I'm living the American dream. I'm the first in my family to earn a college degree. I started a business. I hired people. I was able to build my home and start a family. And since I was 18, I volunteered in my community and served in my community, and something that I think is very important. These are things that can only happen in America. Like I said, coming from a background of the way I did as a child, yet I served. I joined the Army when I was 18 as a private, and became a general officer. These things are the American dream, but what I continue to fight for, or what I went to Congress to fight for. And by the way, I had never had any plans to be in elective office. People like me that don't know anybody and don't have any money never seem to be the people that would run for office and certainly win. But I looked at the direction of our country and look at the American dream for everybody slipping away. The people that are around my community that I see at the gas station, the grocery store, the local hardware store, you name it, they say they can't afford their daily lives anymore. They've had to give things up. They're buying their groceries on credit cards, and they can't afford their electricity bills or their daycare bills. That's not supposed to be how it is in America. And our streets aren't safe. We had a young lady killed, brutally raped and murdered by somebody here illegally, and then to find out that from the Department of Homeland Security that over the last 4 years, 13,000 convicted murderers have been let into our country, and they're just wandering around. 450,000 violent felons in our country wandering around, just let in. We want to be able to. We want to know that our family members. My wife and I have two daughters. We want to know that they can, go up by to get the school bus or get off the school bus, and that they're going to make it down the driveway without somebody taking them from us. And so that's a concern for me. And of course, generally speaking, I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I serve on the Intelligence Committee. What's happening around the globe? I think it's got people's anxiety up. We have gotten ourselves involved in a couple wars. Of course, China is saber rattling in Taiwan, and that whole region of the world has huge implications for us economically, since we've offshored so many things to the Far East. Our drug, our connection to being able to buy prescription drugs, metals, so many critical things. Those are all concerning, and whether we're going to be safe as Americans when that North Korea has ballistic missiles and nuclear capability, when Iran has ballistic missiles and perfecting nuclear capability, and what's happening with our allies, the Jewish state. So these are all concerns that are weighing on families. And so my job is to be the voice of the people, 760,000 people in this 10th district, and to make sure that those concerns are heard in Washington, and that we're trying to find solutions, not just complaining about them, but trying to find a solution, whether that's across the aisle, on the same side of the aisle, on both sides of the aisle, but just working tirelessly to make sure their voice is heard, make sure their concerns are heard, and make sure their concerns are addressed with some kind of viable solution. So that's what I've done. Now, people say, well, you've been there a long time and there's still a lot of problems. I just want to remind everybody that 8 of the years I've been there, I've served under Democrat presidencies, and we see things very differently. And over this period of time, we have become a less affluent society. It's harder to make a living, and your money doesn't go that far. Over that period of time, we've become a less healthy society. And I can get into all the metrics of that, but trends are not in the right direction. And so I'm hoping to see a dramatic change in that. And I think that a lot of the American people are just kind of sick and tired of wondering what their future is. So I hope that kind of wraps up where I'd like to go and where I think our country's headed.
Thank you, Congressman. John?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. Appreciate that intro and you joining us today. There's a lot to unpack there, and I'm sure we'll get to a lot of it here. But I want to start off. You talked about your experience starting a business and working in the private sector. As you know, the Pennsylvania Chamber represents nearly 10,000 businesses of all sizes in every industry across Pennsylvania. These are businesses that their employers get up every day and they worry about making payroll and taking care of their employees. And you've lived that. And how does your experience as a small business owner influence how you approach your job in Washington as a legislator?
Well, that's an awesome question, John. And I was one of the people that worried about payroll, insurance, receivables, taxes, regulations on a regular basis. And people that haven't been in business never think about those things. They just think that the owner of the business is somehow fabulously wealthy. All I did, as you probably recognize, John, like many of the businesses that you represent, is anytime we made any money, we hired somebody if we could. We bought it, we put it right back into the business, into better equipment, more capacity, more ability to make our community better and do more things. And so with that, oftentimes I'm faced with a tax question or a regulatory question. And many times, my colleagues will say, certainly colleagues that have never owned a business, they will say something like, well, government needs to be a good partner with business. And I would just tell you, as a former business owner, what I wasn't looking for was another partner. It was tough enough running my business, trying to make decisions with the team that I was working with. I certainly didn't need a partner that didn't have a vested interest in the outcomes of it, telling me how to do things. I was the one getting up early in the morning, oftentimes out in the field, steel toe work boots on, work gloves, sweating it out, hard hat or whatever. And then at night, after 6, 7 o'clock, sitting down at the kitchen table with specifications, working on bids to try and get the next job, or working on, making sure the billing got out on time or the payables got out on time. So that's my framework. That's how I approach things. Government is supposed to set up the architecture, the framework for individuals and for businesses to thrive, not be meddling in them, not be getting involved with them. As a matter of fact, the more that we can let business just do its thing, the more efficient it becomes, because that's how the free market works. It's more efficient and it's more productive, and that's my viewpoint coming from experience.
Congressman, you touched on federal regulation, and I think related to that is also out of control federal spending. You have been a longtime advocate for a balanced budget amendment and cutting federal spending. But how do you balance the need to invest in things like strategic infrastructure improvements, or establishing the necessary framework for prosperity and growth, providing a platform for a more robust and prosperous energy economy in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, with also paring back on federal spending and getting our debt and deficit under control?
Well, I will tell you, one of the things that most people don't realize, that members of Congress, every single spending bill that we vote on, every cent that we vote on is actually all borrowed money. All the rest of it just gets spent anyhow. We don't even vote on it. And so always I look at it with a very discerning eye at what we're spending people's money on. And of course, I always look at what the impact is going to be. Right now, like I said, my bosses can't afford their daily bills, right? What they used to buy 4 years ago, they can't afford today. And so I always kind of take an approach that looks at it from that viewpoint. And of course, also because, I put my hand on the Bible and taken an oath to the Constitution. And there are certain things that government should be involved in. Obviously, infrastructure. We got a new bridge going across Route 83. The people here that live here that pay taxes deserve that new capacity. If you've sat out there in the morning or in the evening, it's a parking lot. They deserve that, and they've paid for that. But what shouldn't come for that is a bunch of policies that the people didn't ask for, that are not in my view, constitutional, like forcing them, for instance, into Green New Deal social engineering programs. Yes, the government and for the Constitution has a place in infrastructure, but we don't need to be forcing people to make choices that they wouldn't normally make. If you want to buy an electric car, God bless you. You should be able to do that. If you don't want to, you shouldn't have to. If you want to buy a gas stove, you should be allowed to do that. If you want to buy an electric stove, God bless you. That should be your right. But the government too oftentimes tries to, through policy or through regulation, and generally speaking, through both, with money, tries to coerce our citizens to make the choices that the government wants us to make. That's not the free market. That's not freedom. And so I can't be part of that. So just to give you an example, the last highway bill, it's a highway bill, right? It was only 20 some percent highway and bridge. The other 70 some percent was Green New Deal stuff that has nothing to do with the hard infrastructure that we need. Instead of fixing one bridge in the district, we probably could have fixed all the federal roads and the bridges in the district if we would just view things from the point of what the proper role of government is and what it isn't.
Congressman, in the same context of federal spending, we're seeing many Democratic campaigns this election cycle focusing on this new term called greedflation, which is essentially a made up word to blame businesses for
Yes.
rising costs. And when most economists today would point to the $10 trillion in
Yeah.
federal spending over the last half a decade that's occurred. What do you equate rising inflation to, and what steps can Congress take to bring costs down for Pennsylvania businesses that are quite frankly dealing with rising costs just like everybody else?
Yeah, thank you so much, John. The rising costs are clearly and directly and unequivocally associated with out of control federal spending, bar none. Stop the conversation. This whole made up term of greedflation. Look, I know that my friends on the other side of the aisle want somebody to blame, but they need to look in the mirror instead of businesses. If you really believe that every single business that you go to, and I mean every single one, from your local lumber store to the big box store to your local grocery store to the little corner store, how is it that every single one of them have gotten together in some room and said, you know what, we're all going to raise our prices and we're all going to shrink the amount by which for each product we sell? That we're all going to do that. These are your neighbors. These are people that live right beside you that are paying the same bill. And quite honestly, the Democrats, the left, the Biden Harris administration in particular, ought to be thanking these businesses. I know as consumers, like we get upset with it, but if you think you're going to go out and buy half a gallon of ice cream, first of all, there's no such thing as a half gallon anymore. Now, you're going to pay a lot more for the packaging that you get, and the packaging is going to be smaller. When I say thank the businesses, I'm talking about the Biden administration. The Biden administration should thank these businesses because if they didn't make the packaging smaller, the price would actually even be higher. What they're trying to do is find a way to sell their product and make it somehow affordable for people to buy it, even in the face of just ever rising cost, completely rising costs. And gentlemen and ladies, as you know, energy is a component of every single thing, whether it's making the ice cream or getting the ice cream to your store or running the freezer that the ice cream's in. And as long as this administration is anti-American energy, the cost of energy is going to go up, and it's going to be reflected in every single thing in the supply chain. And of course, they don't want to have that conversation. They don't want to talk about it because they're responsible for it. So they come up with a catchy name, greedflation. Well, I'll tell you who the greedy ones are. The greedy ones are the people that are doing it at the federal level. It's them.
There is arguably no more important issue in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania than the potential that could be realized through its energy economy.
Right.
And you have supported an all above approach energy strategy from fossil fuels to renewables. Let's give everybody a shot. Everyone
Yep.
has a role to play. Um, and I want to hear about the economic potential from you and what we need to do in order to realize that. But there's also a very significant national security
Yes.
consideration.
I'm glad you brought it up.
Pennsylvania represents perhaps one of the most significant strategic threats to nations like, adversary nations like Russia and China. So we often talk about the energy economy in terms of new jobs, in terms of making sure we have a healthy environment, and they're important. But I'd love to hear you touch for a few moments on the geopolitical strategic importance of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and sort of the interrelated impacts that can have on not just our economy, but on the overall sort of future of our nation.
Yeah. Such a wide ranging, broad, sweeping question. Let's just start out with the fact that Americans deserve and can have clean, abundant, and affordable energy if we allow the market to do its job. The all above approach works in that paradigm, and those who produce the best and the most efficiently will win that race. Now, geostrategically, uh, what people don't realize is right now we're fighting wars or we're involved in wars. Let's say Russia and Ukraine. Russia is able to prosecute that war because they're selling energy around the globe, but particularly to Europe. Europe has been crying out for American energy, particularly Pennsylvania natural gas, LNG. and as a hedge against being held hostage by Russia. But we have throttled. We won't even build a pipeline anymore. We can't even, before we even talk about overseas, let's talk about the United States of America. We're buying Russian gas in New England because we can't use Pennsylvania natural gas because we can't get it there either by pipeline. And actually, we can't even build a ship because of federal regulations. We can't even build a ship to get it there. So the point is that we're funding this Ukrainian war. We're sending munitions over there. But not only that, we're actually paying for their bureaucracy because Russia has the money to prosecute that war. And they have the money to prosecute that war because they're selling their energy to Europe. If Europe could buy their energy from the United States, in particular Pennsylvania, on the East Coast, sitting on hundreds of years of energy reserves, they could tell Russia to get out. Russia wouldn't be making that money. They wouldn't be using it to advance their war in Ukraine. And we could squeeze Russia out of Ukraine without sending munitions, without losing more lives. But it doesn't just stop at Russia and Ukraine. It also goes to Iran, who has been relieved of the sanctions, who is selling their oil abroad. If we could replace the oil and the petroleum products that they're supplying abroad, we could also squeeze them out, and they wouldn't be able to afford their proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis. Right now, the United States of America is the greatest military in the world, is being outdone in the Gulf of Aden, that's Yemen, by terrorists and flip-flops in John boats. It's absolutely outrageous. And so while the market seeks to address these issues, it is our federal government that stops us from doing it. It doesn't not only hurts us from a national security standpoint as a country, but it hurts Pennsylvania in particular. I was around, and I suspect you were. If you went up in the mid-state 15, 20 years ago, family farms were going out, that they were just walking away from their mortgages because they couldn't afford them anymore, and they couldn't afford to farm anymore. And it was like going back in time up there. With the advent of exploration for gas and oil across the Marcellus Shale and the Utica Shale, it revitalized not only that whole region, but the entire state. The entire state benefits from that. And every time we hamstring that and choke ourselves off in that, all we're doing is hurting ourselves, hurting our own commonwealth, and hurting the country, not only from the perspective of the energy bill you pay at the gas pump, to your heating oil, to your electricity bill, but also from a national security standpoint, because you're paying taxes to then send bullets to Ukraine and to arm and help Israel in its war against a terrorist country that we could choke out economically and force them to not be attacking their neighbors. It's such an easy equation, but we've walked away from it for some worshiping of this thing called the Green New Deal.
Congressman, just as energy security plays into national security, so does border security. And this has been a very hot button issue over the last several years under the Biden administration. Um, is this a political football that will constantly be debated without any real action to secure our border, but also reform our legal immigration process so that people who want to come here to this country and work and follow our laws can do so, and employers can hire them? Will we ever get to a deal in Congress to fix our immigration system?
John, obviously the immigration system is broken. As a second generation immigrant myself, I'm very respectful of those who go through the process that we have to come here. Unfortunately, you're right, and they're right. It's way too cumbersome. It takes too long. It's too expensive. That having been said, the American people are outraged, rightfully so, at the tens of millions of people just walking across the border and being in America. We already talked about the 13,000 murderers that are walking around our country, the 450,000 violent felons that have come across the border and are somewhere in our community, the unfortunate and untimely deaths that have occurred to our American citizens, for those who are here illegally. But there's other issues involved with that, and I just need to mention them. When you talk about housing, when you talk about healthcare, when you talk about education, Americans are taking a back seat. And it's not just down at the border, it's in Pennsylvania. There's a little town called Charleroi in southwestern Pennsylvania, where the citizens there are being redlined out of their own residences because people here illegally are receiving federal subsidies that jacks up the price of housing. The residents can no longer afford to live there, and now the illegals are pushing them out. And so you ask if we're ever going to get to a solution. I think people recognize the problem in Congress, but as long as my friends on the other side of the aisle are hell bent on allowing as many people to come across the border illegally as is physically possible, there's not going to be a bipartisan solution. It's pretty clear at this point. We in the House passed what you know as HR2, the strongest border security bill ever to come through. We're going to need unified government. We're going to need a president that will sign that legislation so we can actually secure the border. The light at the end of the tunnel is if we can actually secure the border and deal with some of these internal problems and clean some of that stuff up, I think the American people will be much more amenable to changing and reforming our legal immigration system so that it serves America and it's respectful and empathetic to those who want to come to America.
Congressman, much like John brought up the topic of greedflation, the
Yeah.
other hot button issue this campaign season has been this idea that American democracy is being threatened, that it is fragile, that it is under attack. I wanted to give you a few minutes to talk about this issue, broadly speaking. Do you see American democracy as in a place of fragility, as under attack? And to the extent that you agree with that notion, what do you see as the actual threats to our form of government and our ability to be a healthy, prosperous, and self-governing people long after any of us on this call are around?
It's one of the things that I think keeps people up at night, especially now. And I do think that democracy, first of all, let's really characterize it what it is. We have a republic, right? Operated democratically by voting, but it is fragile and it can be made fragile, especially when you're bringing in millions upon millions of foreign nationals who don't have any stake in America, who aren't connected to the struggles of American and America and Americanism. If they're going to be allowed to vote, and they're being registered right now in Pennsylvania, that's a suicide recipe for the rest of the country, and people see that, and so they have this concern about it. And so I think that democracy is under threat. But I will tell you this: part of the system, it's always characterized as being under threat, but only from one political perspective. So I'm going to give you the other perspective. In 2016, Bernie Sanders was on track to win the Democratic nomination. Now, Bernie Sanders is an avowed socialist who's running on the Democrat ticket, and the Democrats were so fearful that he would actually win and not be able to defeat the Republican that they used the dirty tricks that they are so well known for, pushed him out of the race and installed Hillary Clinton. These are the same people that say that the right is a threat to democracy. But that was in 2016. In 2020, it was a similar circumstance where they couldn't reach a consensus, and they pushed everybody else out of the race. Forget what the voters thought, the primary voters, and they elevated Joe Biden to the top of the race against the wishes of their primary voters. And we just saw it in 2024. My goodness, they disavowed every single primary voter that voted for their nominee and just installed their own person. But I don't know how this happens, but we have somebody that has never received one vote in a primary as the standard bearer for the majority party for the presidency. And so, yes, the democracy, the choices of the American people, if you look at it from that context, are being completely obliterated. But that doesn't end there. We survived as a democratic republic for a couple hundred years, voting on election day and standing there in front of the poll worker who checked your signature, who probably knew you from living down the street or something like that. We survived that way with that and absentee ballots that you requested if you could not be at the polls. And all of a sudden in the 21st century, we can't seem to get it right. We have all this mail-in voting. Nobody can make it to the polls. We don't get to know on election day. It takes weeks sometimes to figure out who the victor was. And I wonder, it sure seems to me that we're headed back. We're headed backwards. We have drop boxes being put all around counties, including in the district that I'm honored to represent. And nobody asked the question, why do you need a drop box for a mail in ballot? Don't you have a mailbox? Of course, people have a mailbox. Nobody's being disenfranchised. If you can drive to a drop box, you can drive to the post office. You can drive to the Board of Elections and insert your ballot there. All these things serve to breed discontent and people have reservations. They have questions. They don't fully trust our election system or electoral process. And that is a very dangerous thing for a democracy and certainly a republic that operates under democratic principles.
Congressman, we talked a lot about threats to the nation, but I want to look at opportunities now. In your intro, you went through your background, which really is the American dream, growing
Yes.
up from modest means to starting your own business to serving in the military to now serving in Congress. What is your message to voters who may feel increasingly as though that same American dream that you experienced is becoming harder and harder to realize?
Well, I would tell them that I agree with them. First of all, it is harder and harder to realize. We started our business in my mom's garage with a couple $1,000 and a lot of hard work and late nights. But I think it's very difficult to do that these days. And that's unfortunate. And I think that as citizens, we have just been kind of willing to just let things go on and not really weigh in because it's uncomfortable, it's confrontational. But I think that America has been slowly waking up, and you saw some things. Certainly at the federal level in government. We saw the Speaker of the House for the first time in years and years, and I'm talking about back to John Boehner, had to leave, right, because wasn't getting the job done. And after that, you saw President Obama was the president during that period of time, but they saw this fundamental transformation of America and they disagreed with it and they fought back and they elected President Trump. And then you fast forward the deal that we tried to make with Kevin McCarthy to actually cut federal spending just a little bit. It's still going to all be borrowed money, but just a little bit to at least signal that we got the message and to make it more of a participant-based organization. So every member, whether you were in leadership or whether you were newly elected, whether you're Democrat or Republican, could just actually participate and advocate for your constituents. We thought we had a good thing going, but when it didn't work out, Kevin McCarthy's gone, and you see the intensity of the electorate right now. I think that the pendulum has swung too far, and people and we've come to the challenge later than we should have. But I think there is a healthy recognition that things are very badly on the wrong track, and people are speaking up, and people are willing to stand up to say, "Hey, look, we've got to do something about this." And so I think that if you're saying the American dream is lost, how do I get there? It's probably not going to happen as fast as we'd like to, but I think there's a lot of people that see the perils of the track that we're on and want to reclaim the ability for people to be free and to choose their own enterprise and do great things for themselves while at the same time do great things for their community.
I think we could probably have you on all day, but we appreciate the fact that you have constituents to get to and more important people to talk to than us. But with just a couple of weeks to go until
Yeah.
election day, um, I wanted to give you a few moments if there's a topic we didn't touch on, or just your closing argument to the people of Pennsylvania's 10th Congressional District as you seek another term in Congress. What is the message, cutting through all the noise?
Yeah.
What is the message that you really want to leave them with walking away from this conversation today?
Yeah, I think the message is that I recognize what the American dream is because I'm living it, and I want it not only for my children who are young, very capable young ladies themselves, still in middle school and high school, but I also want it for everybody else's children. But it's much deeper than that. I want it for every single person that's in this district, whether you live in the city or whether you live in the suburbs or out in the country, whether you work at nighttime or whether you work in the daytime, whether you're tall or whether you're not. Every single person deserves to know what the playing field is and to realize their maximum potential. And I've been fighting whether at the state house or down at the federal government as a reformer. My whole career has been as a reformer. And it's not picking on the left or the right, it's picking on the wrong that I see, no matter who's doing it. And so I'm asking for their vote because I think a vote for me is a vote to recognize their constitutional freedoms. A vote for me is to recognize that they earn their money that they work for, and they should be able to keep as much of it as possible. And they determine best where it's spent, not the state government, not the federal government. And that finally, we need somebody that's going to fight for our communities to be safe. It's one of the core functions of government. And when we're concerned about our own safety and our, I grew up where, when we finally did have a car and so on and so forth, you left the keys in the car, you left your front door unlocked, and it was, that's how life was. Whether I lived in Harrisburg up on Berry Hill Street, or whether I lived, down in the old farmhouse. And we've gotten so far away from that and mistrusting the community around us because it's become dangerous. That is not what America is about. And so I'm going to fight every single day with everything I have. I'm going to be straight with you. We're not always going to agree. That's for sure. But I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to be respectful. I'm going to listen to your concerns, and I'm going to fight my hardest to make sure that you get to realize everything that makes your life wonderful and that your voice is heard. And so that's all I can do, gentlemen and ladies. I am, all I can do is tell you what I'm going to do. Go do it. Do my work, pray to the good Lord, and leave it in your hands. And it's always worked before. And I'm going to be happy with the outcome, no matter what it is, because I know I'm going to have done my best.
Well, given what's at stake for the future of the nation in this election, I just want to sincerely thank you on behalf of the folks at Broad and Liberty, Politics PA, the Voices of Reason team, the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. Congressman Perry, thank you so much for taking so much time to spend with us and provide our viewers with such substantive dialogue here on the most important issues of the day. We really appreciate it. And I also want to thank John Anzer, my spot co-host today. John, thanks to you and to the Chamber for sponsoring the Keystone Candidate Forum, and look forward to doing it again soon. So, gentlemen, thank you both for your time today, and look forward to seeing you again. Good luck on Election Day, Congressman.
Awesome. Thank you very much. God bless you all.
Our thanks to Representative Scott Perry for participating in our Keystone Candidate Series. Look for more interviews with the movers and shakers in Commonwealth politics coming up in the upcoming weeks. Now we turn to our conversation with a pair of longtime Republican political strategists, Dennis Powell and Craig Snyder, a pair of Republicans who lay out their case for their preferred presidential candidate, and they don't agree on which candidate that should be. Welcome back to Voices of Reason. My name is Steve Ulrich, and we have a treat for you today. We are going to have a conversation with two political consultants, one from the right and one from the left, on their views on how the presidential campaign is playing out, not only nationwide, but throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Please be joined by Dennis Powell. He's a consultant, thought leader, author, and opinion contributor for The Hill and Real Clear Politics, among others, and Craig Snyder, instructor for the Annenberg School for Communications and a member of Republicans for Harris. We do want to let you folks know that neither of our guests today represent the respective campaigns, and they are speaking as informed citizens with decades of experience in politics about how two political consultants arrived at different places in 2024. Dennis, Craig, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Dennis, let me start with you. Just why have you taken the position you have so far in the campaign?
Well, I'll go back to an old John Wooden quote. He says, character is what you do when nobody's looking. And I think when I look at these two candidates, I have to ask, what are they really about? When you boil it all down and get to the essence, what do they really believe in? I think Trump has been fairly consistent since 2016. He wants to return America to a more traditional stance, which is based on foundations of family, community, and belief in a power greater than ourselves. I think Harris is presenting several faces. I think she'd like to be considered as the Attorney General of California, which was 2017. She skips her period as a senator, and then she also pretty much skips her period as the Vice President of the United States. But I think these, when I look at their statements and try to understand what is at the foundation of it, I see Trump as traditional America. I see Harris as wanting to transform America into something that's different. She comes from a very, very different place, more or less like post-capitalism and things like that. I think one of the things that she says repeatedly that I think is one of her core beliefs, because she speaks with such conviction and such clarity and such force when she talks about it, is equity. And I see under a Harris administration that we'd have a continuation of the equity agenda, which I don't think positions America very well going into a future that's going to be very, very competitive as we transform from the information economy to the AI economy. And so many challenges face us around the world. I just don't think she's the right person at this time to be the president of the United States.
Craig, you obviously come from a different position. How did you arrive at where you stand with the campaign?
I do. Steve, it's interesting that you introduced me as sort of representing the left, because that's not something that's ever been said about me before. But I'll take it for today. The left flank of this discussion. First of all, let me thank Dennis for this great idea, and Broad and Liberty, and you, Steve, for giving us the perfect platform. So yeah, I'm here to advocate today for the election of Vice President Harris as the next president. I think, like a lot of Americans, I have been buoyed in my faith in the country's future and in our sort of innate ability for self-correction since the emergence of Harris as the Democratic nominee, because in part she represents generational change that I think is long overdue, and the potential to finally shatter the last great glass ceiling on the achievement of women in our country. Beyond that, I think she has shown herself to be a leader who's capable of growing and learning and compromising. And yes, she's made a transition, I think, from a sort of a more left position in the 2019 campaign, and in her representation of California, which is obviously a left kind of place, to where she is now, which is, I think, in a center left place that can join with the rest of the what I consider to be the vast American center. The majority of Americans are in the center, and by creating a coalition of the center left and the center right, I think she can represent a way to end what I see as the kind of mud wrestling between the two extremes that have characterized our politics. Now, I'm not here to say that she's, Abraham Lincoln or Winston Churchill. Maybe she is. Maybe she'll turn into a great president. We don't know that yet for sure. But I do think we know, and this is, I guess, where my sharpest disagreement is with my friend Dennis, that the character of her opponent, Donald Trump, is, in my view, manifestly unfit for the office. He has a politics of grievance, of division, and in his own words, it's increasingly dark. And I'll end on what is, I think, the most important point. He refused to accept the results of the last election. He refuses to do so to this day. And he tried through an elaborate set of schemes, which are now fully documented, to trash George Washington's greatest legacy, which is the peaceful transition of power. So the way I tell people who aren't satisfied with this choice, and many people aren't, is that we've been invited to a banquet, and we can pick chicken or fish for dinner. We may want pasta or sushi or a steak, but we're not getting it. They're not on the menu. It's chicken or fish. For Harris, for many sort of conservative voters, center right voters, Harris is, an ordinary chicken dinner, not particularly exciting. But for me, Donald Trump is a fish that's gone rotten, and that makes the choice pretty clear.
Let's debate some of the key issues of the day, and let's start with the economy. And Dennis, let me start with you. When you think back on the Trump years from 2017 through the end of 2020, why do you consider his economic plan to be superior to Kamala Harris's plan?
Well, his track record's superior. What he accomplished is superior to what has been happening. I think Trump, as an entrepreneur and a businessman, has built things. He knows how to see. He's a problem solver. He attacks things with clear goals and clear objectives. One of the problems that we face in America right now is, according to CNBC, we're accumulating debt at a rate of $1 trillion every 100 days. That is completely unsustainable. We need growth, and I like the people that are being attracted to Trump's campaign because they're entrepreneurial. You think of a Vivek Ramaswamy and a Doug Burgum. I mean, these are people who've built multi-hundred million dollar companies. Elon Musk. I mean, if we're going to find a vision for the future, which is not the same old, which is not we just do more, we throw more money at the problems and not get the solutions that we want. We need new thinking. And of all the things in this campaign that I think Trump, who will only have 4 years, he'll bring tremendous new thinking. He'll look for results. He'll look for solutions. He'll recommend things that change the equilibrium between government and the people. And I think you'll see great things in a very rapidly changing world come out of the Trump administration versus our economy.
Greg, let me follow up on that about the debt. One of the big questions is Kamala Harris lays out her economic plan. There are a lot of proposals that are meant to reach out to the swing voters, certainly in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but how is her opportunity economy going to be funded?
Well, I mean, the economists that have looked at the two plans that are on the table now, and we all have to understand that the campaign promises about economics and taxes have to be taken with more than a grain of salt. But to the extent that there are plans on the table, the economists have looked at them and said that Trump would blow the deficit open by an additional $10 trillion over that administration, and Harris would blow the deficit open by an additional $1 trillion. Now, if you're a deficit hawk, you don't like either, but one is better than 10 the last time I checked. Look, let me go back a little bit. I think that any true conservative would tell you that presidents do not and should not control the American economy. We give too much credit and too much blame in our politics to presidents for the state of the economy at any given time. Having said that, the economic conditions that Joe Biden is turning over to whoever the next president is are in the nonpartisan and respected for decades words of economists like Mark Zandi at Moody's just put this out the other day. The turnover economy is going to be the best we've ever seen. And we don't have time to go through all the statistics, but you can go through every one of them. And we have a very strong economy. We have the strongest economy in the world by far. Now, Americans are concerned, as they should be, because there was a really shocking burst of inflation as the economy emerged from the pandemic. We had a classic recipe, literally the textbook definition for inflation, which is too much money chasing too few goods. We had too much money in the system because of a bipartisan agreement of Republicans and Democrats in Congress to pass 4 giant COVID relief bills that flooded the economy with money. And we had too few goods because of enormous supply chain interruptions caused by a once-in-a-century event. It caused a burst of inflation, which our system collectively, particularly the Federal Reserve, answered. It answered intelligently and correctly. Inflation is now back under control. We have significant growth. We have enormously good job market. So the idea that the economy is in a crisis that needs to be fixed is just political fiction. And the idea that Trump's policies would somehow create a much higher level of growth did not occur in the first administration. And the economists who've looked at it now say what they will really do is create a much higher level of debt and a new round of inflation triggered by high tariffs.
Let's turn to the question of immigration in America, and I'll start with you, Craig. Was the Biden-Harris administration really just too late to quote unquote close the border? And what should Vice President Harris say to sway voters who feel that way?
Yeah, again, I don't represent the campaign, as you said. My personal view is that everybody should stipulate that the Biden-Harris administration allowed a great influx of illegal migrants into the country for the first more than 3 years. They were wrong to have done so. And I think they should admit it today. But why did they do it? Why did they do it? Why did it happen? Because in American politics, just like in physics, things produce an equal and opposite reaction. And the permissive border policy of the Biden administration in the beginning was an equal and opposite reaction to the racism and cruelty of the Trump approach. They were determined, as is usually the case in the sort of pendulum of American politics, they were determined to not be Trump. They went too far, and they should say they went too far. Okay, but where are we now? Where are we today? And looking forward, the Biden executive action on asylum, which Harris has now proposed to take those tightening reforms even further, have effectively controlled the border. But what we need, as we have needed for a generation, is a comprehensive legislative approach to immigration reform that combines border security and a consensus on what kind of legal immigration we want in this country, how many, from where, what kind. We need that. We've needed it for a long time. We're operating under a law passed in 1965, and the world has changed dramatically. That comprehensive reform is possible under Harris. It's unthinkable under Trump. What we're going to get under Trump, in fact, I think the scariest thing that might happen in the next possible Trump administration is the idea of Stephen Miller being in charge of a program of mass deportation. I was at the Republican convention with the signs being waved, mass deportation, mass deportation. They were even waving those signs while J.D. Vance was introducing his immigrant wife. That could cause mass deportation of the sort being discussed, could cause enormous civil unrest. It would tank the economy, and it would encourage our foreign adversaries to seek their maximum objectives in the world because they would see us tearing ourselves apart. We need thoughtful, comprehensive immigration reform, not a radical, racist mass deportation, which is what Trump offers.
Dennis, as a follow-up to that, you look at what has happened in Springfield, Ohio, Aurora, Colorado, even Charleroi, Pennsylvania, in terms of in some cases, some pundits will refer to them as dog whistles when it comes to the idea of mass deportation. What do you say to those who look at former President Trump's policy and speeches and what he wants to do, and that just say that's just too extreme for me?
Well, he won't deny the problem. And one of the foundations that I point out in my book of strategic issues management is you have to see clearly. And I think this is a recurring problem in the Biden-Harris administration. Seeing clearly means you don't only see where you want to go, but you see the consequences of getting there. And I think they were completely overwhelmed by what happened when they opened the borders. They couldn't process people. People came across, they didn't know who they were. People came across who were known terrorists. We have the equivalent of a brigade of young Chinese of military age who've just walked across our border. It's bankrupting our cities. It's straining our social services, our schools, which cannot even educate poor children in our inner cities, are now being tasked with educating people who speak languages no one really understands. They need to bring translators with them to the schools. Our hospitals, we're bringing in diseases. It was totally unthought through. And it just shows a crisis of strategic leadership that I think Vice President Harris shares with Joe Biden, that will continue because issue after issue after issue shows that they focus on a goal, but they don't focus on consequences of achieving that goal. And I think it would be a disaster under Harris. I do not think it would change because of her fundamental belief that will be a global society where there are no borders, where there really are no governments. I think that's where the ultimate goal is. But I just find this failure of strategic management to be very concerning to me. And I see nothing in what she says or even what the president says that leads me to believe anything else.
Let's turn to national security, and I want to talk a little bit about the war in Ukraine and the crisis in Israel with Hamas. I'll start with you, Dennis. I'm old enough to remember when Russia was the evil empire, and I think it strikes some as head scratching as to why the Trump administration seemed to have more support for Russia than necessarily democratically elected government in the Ukraine. Uh, where do you see this going in that country?
Well, again, I'll go back to some of the rules of issues management. And you have to ask another simple question: what's it look like when it's over? And that's where I would start with Ukraine. What's the war look like when it's over? Now, Russia took Crimea under the Obama administration. Are they going to give it back? Are they just going to turn tail and run back to Moscow defeated by Ukraine? Russia has nuclear weapons. They're not going to give, and they have a dictator who runs the country. They're not just going to turn tail and run with saying that, oh, they beat us fair and square, so we're going to go back and they can have all their land back. It's not the way it works. The history doesn't say that. The aggression of Russia doesn't say that. And aggression usually fills the vacuum of weakness. And I think we've been very weak in foreign policy. As far as Israel is concerned, this is existential for Israel. I am 100% behind Israel. It shows a level of courage that you don't see in the international community with Benjamin Netanyahu. These people have said openly and repeatedly that they want, from the river to the sea, they want to extinguish Israel. And yes, we want free speech, but our ability not to, our willingness not to condemn these protesters who are not just against Israel's actions in Gaza, and you could argue that point, it's a valid point, but they're pro-Hamas, they're pro-Hezbollah, they're pro-terrorist. And that's a very frightening position. I think a leader would come out and condemn that. Even you can say, yes, speak about what you want, but I condemn where you want to go with that. I think in foreign policy, we have the threats in Europe, we have the threats in the Middle East, we have a tremendous threat with China in the South China Sea. Our Navy is understaffed. Our military, we're more focused on political correctness than we are on a military, which, I'm saying to say this harshly, but they kill people and break things. That's what militaries are about. And I think that trend will continue under Harris, and it frightens me. I think the world order will disappear if we continue down this path.
Craig, I'll give you the same question.
So, look, to me, when I try to boil down the essence of the Trump claim on international affairs and international security, what I hear him saying is that the world was less conflicted during his presidency because foreign leaders were afraid of him. Now, academics call this the madman theory of presidential leadership. Being unpredictable scares people. It's not a particularly novel theory to Trump, and it's not a completely crazy theory. You do actually want some degree of unpredictability in a negotiating situation. But when you couple this with Trump's clear neo-isolationism, his rejection of our obligations under the NATO treaty that has kept the world safe and prosperous for 80 years, it is certainly a worse choice for Americans who want a peaceful and a prosperous world. The American-led architecture of international relations is not broken. There are cracks, there are strains, there have been all throughout the last 80 years, but it's not broken. It doesn't need to be fixed by being completely replaced, and not by being replaced by what is essentially neo-isolationism. Trump's approach is transactional, it's amoral, it's ahistorical, and I would say to people listening, there's nothing more you really need to know than that he picked for the name of his doctrine, what he calls his doctrine, America First. He picked the name that was used by the Americans who opposed Britain and supported Hitler in the period of the 1930s, leading all the way up until literally the day before Pearl Harbor. That's what they called themselves. They called themselves the America Firsters. He chose that name deliberately because it reflected an idea that the United States could be divorced from the affairs of the other hemisphere, where the great majority of humans live, and that we could somehow sort of protect ourselves by the oceans, rather than being actively engaged in leading the world and leading it particularly in the direction of democracy. I think he's wrong about that. I think it's extremely dangerous.
Let's talk about some social issues. And speaking for myself, and I think I probably fall into the majority of of voters who consider themselves perhaps socially liberal and fiscally conservative. Craig, when you look at whether it's 925 pages of Project 2025, you look at reproductive rights, you look at the years that have passed since January 6th, why are we so divided on these issues when one side says this is a fact and one side says essentially this is fiction?
Well, I mean, the roots of the division on these questions, go back a very long time. Obviously, I think Trump is in some ways more a symptom than a cause of the division when it comes to the social questions. Again, speaking for myself, I would say I don't like either side very much when it comes to this basket of concerns. I think the Democrats under Biden and Harris did go too far left with their talk of birthing persons and white supremacy. But on the other side, Trump has incited and inflamed a coalition on the right of what I would say are the very worst elements of American society. You have virulent anti-Semites. You have Christian nationalists who reject the idea of a pluralist society and the separation of church and state. And you have racists of every genre. Now, those people are a minority, of course, of Trump voters. But they used to be people who didn't participate in our politics at all. In fact, the Republican Party made strong efforts all the way from the 1950s through the 1980s to exclude those folks from Republican politics. I was one of the people who helped write Bob Dole's convention acceptance speech in 1996. And he literally says in that speech, this is not a quote, it's a paraphrase, but he says in that speech, if you're a racist, the exits are up there, go through them. I don't want you in my party. Donald Trump has invited those people into the core of the party. And now he's using barely coded neo-Nazi eugenics language about bad genes and poisoning the blood of America. These things are simply extremist. And I'm going to go back to what I said before. One extreme produces an equal and opposite reaction. So we have extremes on both sides that are crowding out the vast American center. I believe, as I've said, that Harris is closer to that center than Trump is. And that's why we got to pick the chicken and not the rotten fish.
Dennis, your thoughts?
Well, I think it's rich, all the brouhaha over Project 2025. The message that sends to me is, we'll cut off the head of anybody who tries to think about reforming government as it is. In terms of the social issues, I mean, abortion is a key issue. It's played out in every recent campaign. It's been a determinative issue in many of the campaigns. But I look at it, and Harris's position is that she's going to have a federal law to codify Roe versus Wade. If you go back to slavery, another issue that was as divisive as abortion is in some ways. I mean, certainly not comparable. And we tried everything. We tried, we outlawed the importation of slaves early in the 1800s. Then we passed the Missouri Compromise. Then we passed the Fugitive Slave Act. Then we passed the gag order so that abolitionists could not put anti-slavery into any legislation. Then came the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And then we finally went to the Supreme Court and we got Dred Scott. And then the nation fell apart and we fought. But what solved it was an amendment. Now, I know Trump's position is send it back to the states and they'll decide. That is a very messy process, as messy as the foundation of America is. We are a very messy place. That's the way we get things done. We try, we reform, we try again, we reconstitute, we do it again and again and again until we get it right. I think what you see in America on the first go through, you see 6-week bans and you see no bans. I think eventually, and this is maybe not everybody's cup of tea, I think what's going to happen is over the years, and it's going to take several years, we will come to a position where the majority of states, 38, believe that there's a number of weeks that abortion is completely legal. People who don't like it turn their heads. People who support it will get what they want. And it will lead to a constitutional amendment, which will ultimately be the final solution to abortion. Won't please everybody, probably won't please many people. But I think that's where we're going by returning the issue to the states. And what we've done by that is we vilify Congress, the Supreme Court. We try to reconstitute the Supreme Court. We protest the Supreme Court's houses. We almost try to assassinate. Someone tries to assassinate Supreme Court justice. And that's not the way our democracy works. Our democracy is messy. And I think there's no issue where it's messier right now than abortion. And I went back and I looked at slavery and I said, I think we can learn something from how that issue was handled because it didn't work from the top down. It had to work from the bottom up.
We're going to try something a little novel now. I've come up with 4 subjects, but I want to give our guests the opportunity to ask a question of each other. And Dennis, I'll give you the first opportunity to ask Craig a question.
Oh my gosh. Hi, Craig. One of the things, and this again I write about it in my book, is when Biden took office, he was elected to heal the nation. And on his first day, he signed a whole pile of executive orders saying that the focus of my administration is not going to be about healing. It's going to be about climate change and it's going to be about equity. How would you and the people who are part of your group feel that if on January 20th, 2025, President Kamala Harris, after all the festivities, went back to her office and signed a whole slew of executive orders showing that she was the Kamala Harris who campaigned for president in 2019 and not the moderate she pretended to be in 2024?
So obviously I reject the premise that she's pretending. I think she's evolved. I think she's learned. And that's why I don't think she's going to do what you're suggesting. I agree with you that Biden, particularly in the early months of the administration, after the unexpected reality that he controlled the Senate. Remember, he wasn't supposed to control the Senate. I think Biden was counting on a Republican Senate in order to moderate the left wing of his party, and then Trump went out and made sure that Republicans didn't vote in Georgia, and so we ended up with a Democratic Senate, which really did force Biden's hand to the left. Anyway, that's all history. I think that a lot of what Biden did on day one was a mistake. I don't think that Harris is going to repeat those mistakes. If she did, that's your hypothetical, I'd be disappointed. I think I had maybe made a mistake, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Okay.
Now, Craig, I'll give you the opportunity to do the same, ask a question of Dennis.
Sure. So Dennis, I know you are a person of honesty and integrity and a person who believes in the rule of law. So what confounds me is that Trump's refusal to accept and acknowledge the results of the 2020 election and to graciously concede the election as as Al Gore did under difficult circumstances, as Hillary Clinton did in 2016. His refusal to attend the inauguration of the winner of the election. How are these things not disqualifying to you?
I don't like the fact he didn't attend the ceremony. I think he should have done that. That's the bigger man who does things like that. I think a couple things have changed in elections. Number one, I don't think elections are about votes anymore. They're about ballots. I think that was the thing that took Republicans by surprise in 2020. The tens of millions of ballots were sent out. God knows where they went or who got them. And when they came back, whether they were signed properly, whether the addresses matched, whether they got in under the deadline of postmarked under the deadline, whether they were in the hands of the counters on election night, none of that seemed to matter. I think it's a very human reaction to say, I got cheated. And he for regressive grievances, he went back and he tried to undo it. He tried to say, well, there must be more votes there. You shouldn't have counted these votes. He lost. I get it. He's not president. But I think that this idea that Trump's a dictator, if Trump's a dictator, he'd still be living at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, because I believe this is what a dictator would have done. He would have said on election night that any ballot received after the polls closed cannot be counted. And I think the next thing he would have done is anyone like Al Schmidt in Philadelphia, or the Secretary of State of Georgia, or the Secretary of State of Arizona, who counted those ballots, he would have arrested. That's what dictators do. He's not a dictator. He's aggrieved. He was cranky. He was probably pissed, but he did leave and he went back to private life. But he continued to campaign, and I think that the election has changed. I think the Republicans maybe have caught up with a little bit, but I think that that's what caught the Republicans flat-footed, and it's what set Trump off. But I don't think he's a dictator.
We've had a fascinating conversation today with 2 Republican political strategists, and we're going to give them the opportunity to make their closing argument for why they support the candidate they do. Craig, I'll start with you.
Thanks again, Steve. In 2011, 5 years before Trump staged what I think was a sort of brilliantly executed hostile takeover of the Republican Party, former President G.W. Bush said, this is a quote, "If you study history, you see that there are these isms that pop up occasionally. One is isolationism, and its evil twin protectionism, and its evil triplet nativism. If you study the 1920s, for example, there was an America First policy that said, who cares about what happens in Europe? An immigration policy that said we have too many Jews and Italians, and therefore we should stop having immigrants. My point, he said, is that we've been going through a period, we've had a period of isolationism, nativism, and protectionism in the past, and I'm concerned that we may be about to go through such a period again. Boy, was he right in 2011, because those are the principles of Trumpism that took over the party in 2016. But even greater, I think, perhaps, as a threat than this MAGA platform, are the harmful effects on our society of Trump's deeply flawed personal character. I think it's an acid that he's poured over the foundations of our society that has disrupted trust in our institutions, trust in the processes by which we separate the very idea of truth from falsehood and fact from opinion. There have always been millions of Americans who believe things like the world is flat, the United States never went to the moon, public figures that they don't like are really sent here by aliens. I mean, there have always been millions of people who believe that. They mostly didn't vote. Now they do, and they vote for Donald Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Doug Mastriano. They say and believe things like Jews control the weather and can aim hurricanes at Florida, at counties in Florida and North Carolina that are Republican. They really do. They actually believe those things. So now I would like my party back, the Republican Party that existed before Trump. It was a rational center-right party that was able to effectively oppose in many ways the clear and dangerous excesses of the far left. And the only way that happens, the only way we get a rational conservative party back in the United States is for Kamala Harris to defeat Donald Trump and remove his presence from center stage in American political and cultural life.
Thank you. Dennis, your closing argument for your support of your preferred candidate.
Okay, I think there's four disturbing trends that I think would continue under Harris that grow out of their globalist, post-capitalist, World Economic Forum agenda to transform the world post-COVID. The first one, and this is something that really gets in my craw, is Joe Biden doesn't attack just Trump. He attacks Trump voters. In my lifetime, I don't remember a candidate who went after his opponent's voters, and not just his opponent. He repeatedly, almost every speech, goes after MAGA, as if there's some type of, I don't know, hostile army just over the hill that wants to destroy America. Hillary Clinton, back in 2016, called them deplorables. She recently updated that statement. She says deplorables don't go far enough. There is no way to get to unity when you start from that premise that half of America is dangerous, half of America is illiterate, half of America is not worthy of being Americans. I think the second trend that I see, and this is go back to the 2020 campaign and the ability to try to control information by controlling the internet, is this whole idea of misinformation. That's one of the demon words, I call them, that it's widely used right now. John Kerry, just I think last week or the week before, talking about information, talking about misinformation. The president was on television yesterday talking about misinformation. Misinformation basically is anything that criticizes what they do. They don't want a light shined on what they do, because what they do is not governing by the consensus of the people. I think the other thing I see as a disturbing trend is an unwarranted use of excessive force against the American people. I think you can go back to Lois Lerner using the IRS and nothing really happened. But I mean, I look at a Pennsylvania who lived in Bucks County, Mark Houck. Think about how that man was arrested in front of his 7 kids. They sent an army to his home, people in tactical gear, people with automatic weapons. I mean, who were they going after? You could look at the same thing with Roger Stone. They had frogmen in the water. I mean, this is unbelievable in America. But what the dangerous trend I see is every time they do stuff like this and Americans don't speak up, you're giving them permission to do it again. And I see this long list of permissions, which is creating a government that pretty soon will determine what we say, what we think, and what we're allowed to do, taking away our freedom of speech. And the last thing is, I think, the disguising of goals. I think in President Biden, you saw very few press conferences. You saw very few interactions with the press. I think the Harris campaign has followed that suit. I think what they want to do again is so out of step with the will of the American people that they don't want to be questioned. They don't want to be under the microscope. They don't want you to shine a light on what they're doing. I think in many ways, in generations to come, not tomorrow or next week or next year, but maybe in decades when historians look, I think they'll see Trump as a patriot. I think he was a man who risked his life, his liberty, and his fortune to return America to traditional foundations. And I think just like with America, we declared our independence in 1776. We didn't get it right till 1787 when we passed our Constitution. I like the people who were growing up under the Trump umbrella. He didn't get it all right. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew something was wrong. I like the J.D. Vances. I like the Vivek Ramaswamis. This new generation of forward thinkers, people who think outside the box, people who just don't accept the status quo. I think that's very important for the health of our democracy, because we can't take this cumbersome, expensive, unresponsive government that doesn't solve problems forward into the next decade. As a conservative, I think I've always been shaped by where I grew up in the neighborhood in Philadelphia. It was about family. It was about community. And it was about belief in a power greater than myself that provided moral clarity. I think we see that all the time in America. When North Carolina, when the storm hit, who were the first people there? Samaritan's Purse. That's what America's about. It's about Americans helping Americans. It's about people who care about people, who are willing to go that extra yard and go through whatever problems they need to go through to help their fellow Americans. I think Donald Trump wants to bring that America back. He wants to shine a light on that America and say we're a good people, because I think a great country needs good people. And I think we are good people, and he will unleash the power of good people to bring America to lead in the 21st century.
Two gentlemen with decades of experience in political affairs, both registered Republicans, both giving their sides for why they support the candidate they do. Dennis Powell, Craig Snyder, thank you so much today for joining us on Voices of Reason.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate it. It was fun. Craig, it was very much fun. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And we'll be right back. Our thanks to our guest today on Voices of Reason, Representative Scott Perry, who represents the 10th Congressional District, and a pair of longtime Republican political strategists in Pennsylvania, Dennis Powell and Craig Snyder. We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Voices of Reason. Join us again next time. For Politics PA, I'm Steve Ulrich.